Hi everyone, today basically we're going to be talking about the future of leadership, and we're going to set that against the backdrop of what I call new futures. Now, as a futurist and strategic advisor, I work with the vast majority of Fortune 100 organizations. So my clients are inevitably kind of the mid-cap corporations and the mega-cap corporations. So organizations with revenues of about $3 billion to $15 billion, and then organizations with revenues of about $30 billion up. Now, this puts me in a relatively unique position because even though I'm talking to these organizations about the future, what it could look like, the possible, preposterous, plausible, preferred futures and all those kinds of different things that we actually see emerging today, the fact of the matter is that I sit down with the boards of almost all of these organizations on a daily basis, so I can really get to understand basically what they're actually thinking about, what they're concerned about, and what they're worried about basically when we start having a look at things in the future. Now, in this particular presentation, we're going to be focusing on kind of three areas. Now, the first area that we're going to have a look at is this kind of increasingly complex future. We're going to do some baselining and some level setting. Then we're actually going to have a look at leadership itself. And I've decided to break this down into really two sections. We're going to have a look at the mindset that future leaders need, but we're also going to have a look at the skills that they need as well. And then we'll just do a quick round out. Now, this is a fairly lengthy presentation because this is actually designed to provide you with a variety of different perspectives and details that shouldn't be overlooked. So let's get to it. Now, if you want to understand more about all of the different emerging technologies and trends that are increasingly affecting all of us, then scan this QR code, go to the 311institute.com website. I've got about 15,000 pages worth of futures insights. I've written about 14 different books, etc., and you can thumb through these till your heart's content. And you can, all of a sudden, when you really start actually looking at these books, you can appreciate just the amount of change that we're actually seeing today and the number of technologies that are actually driving this change, where artificial intelligence is just one of 600 emerging technologies that I follow. So go and check that out, and then let me know basically if you want me to update them or add anything in that I might have missed. Always happy to be critiqued. Now, a little while ago, basically, this is a sort of slide that I used sort of post-pandemic. We are really in a world basically where the vast majority of leaders basically were being told that we live in a poly-crisis world. And yeah, when we have a look at this was kind of the pandemic. It was supply chain crunches, it was high interest rates, high inflation, it was changing consumer behaviors, it was wars, one war, then two wars and everything else. And yeah, that's all set against the backdrop of an increasingly tense geopolitical sort of situation as well. So we could quite easily argue that today is the most complex business environment that we've ever seen. And while some things are stabilizing, we're seeing new things on the rise. Now, fortunately though, basically for a lot of leaders, as well as individuals, we have to sort of put it into context. There's only one thing changing, so that's kind of the good news. There's only one thing changing. Unfortunately, it just kind of happens to be everything. Now, when we actually have a look at this everything, that's quite a bold statement to make. But when we have a look at society, to technology, the environment, economics and political megatrends, for example, alone, pretty much everything is changing. There's not a single aspect of our lives today that isn't being affected in some way by something relatively new. And when we have a look at these trends, there are, as I said, hundreds of trends, and this is what, as business leaders and as individuals, we are increasingly trying to get our heads around. What does all of this mean for you at an individual level, you at a career or professional level, you at an organizational level, you at an industrial level, and then you at a country level, and then you at a global level? 250 megatrends in about 2 minutes, basically where net zero, climate change, sustainability, artificial intelligence, metaverse and everything else were up there for like a quarter of a second. Now, from a CEO's perspective, so let's bring it back to leaders now. We've actually seen a recent of surveys saying that the companies that CEOs and boards run are only directly influenced by the CEO in about 45% of the time. So 45% of what happens to your business is controlled by the CEO or the leaders. Now that's things like product development, that's things like target markets, that's things like hiring and training and so on and so forth. 55% of what happens to organizations today comes from externalities, external factors, like the trends that we actually just saw, which means that CEOs are actually not in control of their businesses. Because if I had 55% stake in your business, I would be the majority owner, not you. Now, we've also seen the average CEO tenure falling by about 20% over the past 3 to 4 years. So it was 6 years, but the average CEO tenure in the Fortune 250 is now 5 years. Part of the reason for this is because increasingly CEOs basically think that the world is complex. They are under investor pressure. In addition to that, because basically the world is increasingly kind of complicated and uncertain, if they actually get things wrong, which they're much more likely to do than they used to, then those same investors will increasingly say, you've got it wrong, what are you going to do to fix it? Maybe you're not the right person for the job, get out. And then on top of that, you layer on huge amounts of stress and so on and so forth. It's hardly surprising that today we're seeing more leaders actually burning out than ever before. And then of course, basically a little sort of PwC survey that we saw recently, they went to about 4,400 multinational CEOs and leaders, and they had a variety of different questions. This was across 132 countries. 45% of multinational CEOs said that they believe that within 10 years, their businesses are going to be economically unviable unless they transform. Now, to put that into context, that is almost half of all of the world's businesses believe that in 10 years' time, unless they go through a fundamental transformation of some form, that they will be economically unviable, which is just another way of saying bust, bankrupt, irrelevant, and so on and so forth. So that is a shocking statistic. Now, when we actually start having a look how futurists, investors, and leaders actually align with one another, as a futurist, ultimately what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out what is the problem to solve. So this is kind of the innovator's dilemma. What problem can we solve? Why would we care about that problem? Where is the market opportunity? And will people pay good money if that problem is solved? Then, of course, we talk about, well, okay, once we've identified a problem, how do we solve that problem? And that's a combination of different technologies. And then basically we say, well, once we've created our solution, when will this new solution to this problem become the status quo that affects the revenues or profitability of different companies, different industries, and different sectors? And that's actually a lot more difficult than a lot of people think. There are about 50 different factors that all have to generally align with one another. Things like access to those products, affordability of those products, reliability, trust in those products, things like litigation and liability, things like regulations. All these different market forces have to come together for the new shiny toy that we've created to become the new status quo. Now, from a leader's perspective, again, we're kind of looking at it through the same lens. What is the future? How should we as a business change? And then when should we change and what should we change? Then from an investor's perspective, again, very similar. What is on the rise? So what are the new things that we could think be the industry's future status quo? Where should we put our big bets? How should we actually think about some of these new innovations and these new products and services that are actually coming through? And then, of course, when as investors should we invest? And overall, basically, I'm now working with investors with about $50 trillion AUM, and they all generally think in this way. Some think a little bit more narrow and short term, some think longer term and a little bit broader. But when you actually have a look at futurists, leaders and investors, we're really trying to do the same thing. We're trying to figure out what does the future look like, and then how do we make the most of it? Now, from a disruption perspective, increasingly it's easier and easier than ever before to disrupt really anything. So let's get into that. Now, in the 1970s, the United States military came up with this term, VUCA, if we use the Americanese, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous times. However, over the past sort of 3 to 4 years, we've been putting this new acronym at the end of it, MAX, because increasingly a lot of these changes are massive. So they are global in scale. They are system level changes, as we call them. Those changes in this world basically is accelerating. But then also things are increasingly going exponential. Now, often basically as futurists, there is always a good giggle to be had, because as a futurist, if you don't mention the words exponential technology, then you aren't actually earning your paycheck. However, when we talk about this exponential world that we're going into, we are seeing the speed of change go exponential. We are seeing the speed of innovation go exponential. And then, yes, of course, we do have some rather intriguing exponential technologies basically that we can talk about as well. Now, it used to be the case from a speed of change perspective that we often said that the world was moving at digital speed, or digital was moving at the speed of business, which is actually not quite true, because businesses actually move quite slowly. Now, in June 2019, Mark Zuckerberg released the Libra cryptocurrency. Had he been able to execute properly, he could have had that cryptocurrency being used by over 2.5 billion people by the end of the day. So when we think about the speed of digital, think about the speed of digital disruption in these terms. Today, basically, you could have an idea or a product in the morning, and by the end of the evening, if you knew how to execute perfectly, and that is the real skill nowadays, you could theoretically have that digital product, that idea, in front of 4.5 billion connected people. So when we talk about the speed of digital, it's significant. In addition to that, digital has actually democratized access basically to resources, expertise and investment and capital, which means that last year we saw 100 million new entrepreneurs actually be coming through, which means basically that digital itself is actually fueling a new startup boom. And those startups are getting to unicorn status faster than ever before and disrupting industries faster than ever before. So this is quick, but we get faster, because increasingly we have started moving at the speed of artificial intelligence. Now, when we have a look at artificial intelligence, it used to be the case that we would take, say, 2 years to create a new hardware product, like a car, like a lithium-ion battery, like, for example, a rocket engine. Now, using artificial intelligence, something called general adversarial networks, so GANs, these are a little bit different to the generative artificial intelligences that we're sort of seeing today. These GANs basically are increasingly able to design new hardware products within hours. So this is a rocket engine that was designed in 6 hours by an artificial intelligence owned by Hyperganic in Germany. Then we've got vaccines, and we've got new drugs from companies like Insilico as well as DeepMind. We can create new vaccines in 7 minutes using AI, supercompute, and a variety of other trickeries. Now, when we have a look at Insilico, Insilico's artificial intelligence designed 31,000 new drugs in just 21 days. When we have a look at materials, which is kind of an extension of that, we saw Google's artificial intelligence GNOME come up with 2.2 million new material candidates in 17 days and 40 new novel materials. We also saw it come up with 380,000 new compounds in 17 days, which is more than humanity has discovered in 800 years. We have companies like Under Armour and Amazon that are actually using artificial intelligences to design trainers. This is the Architect sneaker, designed in a couple of hours and 3D printable. And Amazon are using these same technologies to design new fashion styles and so on and so forth. Then we've got code. We have artificial intelligence writing code. So when we have a look at British Telecom Group in the UK, for example, they believe basically that just that one capability alone has allowed them to accelerate the rate of their digital transformation from 3 years down to 6 months. So when we start talking about the exponential acceleration of innovation, this slide quite literally means that you could walk into a biotech company on the Monday, ask them what they've actually got on the truck that's interesting from a product perspective, and they could tell you nothing. Then you could come back tomorrow and they could say, well, the only thing we have is 10,000 new drugs and 3 category A's. So the speed of change is accelerating across the entire stack, and we haven't even got started yet. Now, if the speed of change itself is accelerating, then as a leader, this means that your business strategy and your business vision is fundamentally already flawed. Because if everything is accelerating, then your 10-year business strategy, which is generally going to be more of a human linear sort of business strategy, is probably going to be realized in the real world in 5 years' time, from a market perspective. Yeah, your 5-year strategy on the ground is really a 3-year strategy, and your 3-year strategy could be a 1-year strategy. So any organizations that I work with that are putting together, for example, a 5-year strategy, just think about the impact that OpenAI and ChatGPT had on many, many companies' business strategy. I know a lot of leaders basically where they said, we simply just tore our strategy up and we started rewriting it again. So strategy design has got to be dynamic. It can't just be a one-off every 5 years. It's got to be a constant living document. And then from a leader's perspective, you also need to be this. You need to be more billionaire. So as Ryan Serhart from New York basically often says, you know, when you have a look at billionaires will buy a £100 million penthouse in New York basically with a text because they're too busy. So from a leader's perspective, you need to prioritize basically where you're spending your time, and you need to try to optimize your time wherever possible. Now, from a technology perspective, and I said I follow over 600 emerging technologies, this is my starburst. So this is available in the codexes that I showed you earlier. Now, when we have a look at this starburst, there are 180 emerging technologies across a 50-year timeline split into 13 different categories. There are 23 general purpose technologies, basically where artificial intelligence basically is just one. Now, I'm not going to go through this, but you know, if you want to zoom in, basically then you can sort of have a look at all of the individual technologies we have on there. But the point is, once you've found your problem to solve, you then often solve that problem using a combination of technologies. And that's manufacturing technologies, it's electronics, basically it's intelligence and compute, it's user interfaces and experiences, it might include robotics or communications like 5G and 6G and all these kinds of different things. There might also be embedded security. So what we do basically is we take all of these different technologies, and especially the ones that are maturing and commercializing today, to create our next generation products. Now, when we have a look at the impact basically that all of these different technologies are actually having on the world, it's estimated that so far we have seen value destruction to the tune of about $50 trillion worth of GDP. Now, what we mean by value destruction is as we move from one industry status quo, for example, Volkswagen would make cars that drive themselves, and they'd be combustion engine vehicles. And as they move basically to electric vehicles that eventually drive themselves, all of the investments that Volkswagen made in things like their Wolfsburg plant in Germany need to be written down in new ways. Same with the fossil fuel industry and so on and so forth. So we've already seen $50 trillion worth of value destruction. But these new technologies, these new emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, it's estimated could create up to $250 trillion worth of new value. And that's a conversation in itself. I do wonder about some of those numbers, but actually you can certainly see some significant upsides nonetheless. Which is why today 64% of organizations around the world are heavily focused on what we call value destruction and creative destruction. So they are proactively, these are the leaders proactively going back into their organizations like Samsung, like Huawei, and trying to find new ways to disrupt their businesses. Because if you can find a way to disrupt your business, then inevitably you find the new status quo. Now, Samsung, for example, down in South Korea, has the Chaos Labs. Now, the Chaos Labs basically is a campus full of 3,000 people who are explicitly tasked with trying to essentially disrupt/destroy Samsung. And when they're successful, that's where they push through new technologies. Huawei basically spend $45 billion a year now actually on research and development, and they're just crazy. Now, when we actually have a look at the impact that all these different emerging technologies are having on all of these sectors that we care about, on the one hand, all of these sectors are going through digital transformation, which means that the individual borders and boundaries between these previously distinct industries are now being eroded and are now being eliminated. Which means that, for example, a bank that used to describe itself as a company that provides some form of financial services can all of a sudden start sticking in ride hailing or insurance or food delivery or whatever it happens to be. This is why when we have a look at the giant technology organizations, you ask them what business they're in, and they say all of them. You know, they're in health, they're in entertainment, you know, they're in shopping and e-tail and all these other things, financial services. So digital transformation eliminates the individual boundaries and borders basically between previously distinct industries, which now means that from a leadership perspective, you have new competitors that you didn't see coming. Now, when we actually have a look at the individual impact that these technologies have on different sectors, in the agricultural sector, we see the rise of 3D printed meats, cellular meats that are grown in a lab, and vertical farms. In Dubai, basically, we are starting to 3D print an 11-story skyscraper, which disrupts the construction industry. When we have a look at the energy industry, obviously we're moving to renewables, so wind, hydro and solar, but also mini nuclear reactors. That is part of a $92 trillion shift. When we have a look at the finance space, yes, we have Bank 4.0. However, we also have fintechs. And fintechs are realistically Bank 4.0 already. In fact, they are the traditional banks, if you really want to put them like that, except with a fancier interface. And to the point basically on things like super apps, where organizations are able to move from one industry and one market segment to another, Revolut, which was a fintech based out of the UK, is increasingly a super app. And then, of course, we have decentralized finance, which is disrupting both banks and fintechs and upsetting the regulators a lot. In addition to that, when we have a look at healthcare, we are 3D printing human organs like hearts, livers, skin, bones, and other tissue. We have in vivo gene therapies now, which are curing previously uncurable genetic inherited conditions. And that's before we go into that crazy world of healthcare. When we have a look at manufacturing, we're moving from Industry 4 to Industry 5. We see the slow emergence of what we call dark factories. So dark factories basically are fully automated factories like the ones that we're starting to see come out with in Honhai, in India and China. When we have a look at, for example, entertainment, entertainment basically increasingly is being created by artificial intelligences, so that is a form of synthetic content. When we have a look at things like retail, yes, basically we have metaverse retail. In Hong Kong, basically we've actually got virtual reality malls, and some of the VR malls have over 40,000 stores in there, including companies like Prada and Lego and Nike and so on and so forth. But there's a lot happening in the retail sector. And then when we actually have a look, for example, at communications, yes, we have 5G communications and we have terabit broadband basically actually already coming through in Japan, which is crazy in itself. But you have organizations like OneWeb and Elon Musk's Starlink, basically where we are using tens of thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit to connect the entire planet, irrespective of where you are. That disrupts the traditional communications companies. And then when we have a look at transport, really the best way to summarize the entire transport industry, where we talk about things that move other things around, whether it is a cargo ship, an aircraft, whether it's a car, a truck, a van, etc., etc. The only thing that's really happening there is increasingly we're trying to take the pilot out of the vehicle. So we're trying to turn them autonomous, and then we're trying to electrify them. Or in the case of aircraft, we're playing around with a mix of ammonia, green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels, and all sorts of other things. So as you can see, just basically from these 10 industries are being fundamentally transformed from the inside out and the outside in. So this kind of pulls back to that VUCA world, basically, that we actually talk about. Now, when we actually start thinking about competition, from a leadership perspective, you often think, my next competitor might look like this, but it's highly likely, basically, that that new competitive startup is going to be run by a human. It generally might not be. So at Harvard, basically, we actually used artificial intelligence agents to build an enterprise software company, and they did that in 7 minutes for $1. And actually, the AIs went on to build another 70 businesses. And all we had to do was just instruct the primary agent, go and build a company. And that primary agent understood what we meant by build a company, and it then started directing the resources of other artificial intelligences under its purview to go and do different things. So one would, for example, do market analysis, one would do pricing, one would actually build the products, then they'd bring it all together and say, here's your company. Now, for the past 10 years, and my first video on this, which is on the YouTube channel, for the past 10 years, I've been saying that one day, basically, we will see artificial intelligence build, launch, scale, and operate businesses and companies. And I've said that in front of Accenture, at the Louvre, and all kinds of different organizations. And while the company that we built at Harvard was kind of like a little company, what if you could build a multi-billion-dollar company using artificial intelligence? Now, about 3 to 4 months ago, this next video came out, and listen to it carefully. The video quality basically is a little bit shaky, so JP Morgan need to actually sort out their sound. But this is Sam Altman talking how very soon he believes that artificial intelligence will be able to build multi-billion-dollar companies with either 10 people or 1 person. This is in all likelihood going to be your new, next, fiercest competitor. Hey Sam, take it away.
Highly performant, smaller teams, thanks to these tools and these technologies, you can be able to do so much more. Is that the trend you're seeing from the startups growing around y'all in Cerebral Valley?
We're going to see 10-person billion-dollar companies pretty soon, like billion-dollar valuations. And the thing that in my little group chat with my tech CEO friends, there's this betting pool for the first year that there's a 1-person billion-dollar company, which would have been unimaginable without AI, and now will happen.
I'm so happy you said that, because I literally just wrote that out in a letter to my LPs for an AGM. This is a radical idea, and it gets even more exciting when you remember none of us ever, or all of us who have built companies to even more than 100 people, don't miss back when it was smaller. And I think there's going to be a new drug, you know, the exact opposite of that ZERG phenomenon, where CEOs and founders are going to just be so excited to get up and go to work with, you know, much smaller, much more performant, much more stronger culturally teams. And I'm also kind of bummed I'm not on that CEO group chat. We can table that for later. But I think this feels like a seminal moment. I get you all are not, you know, sitting around patting yourselves on the back, but it's a big deal.
Now, when we actually have a look at the future of work, you know, and you can see lots of these videos, basically again across my YouTube channel, when we have a look at the use of generative artificial intelligence, basically in the workplace, on average, globally, we're seeing a 40% productivity uplift. So there are all kinds of different ramifications, basically, that AI as a technology has, both on the competitive landscape as well as on the operations of your business and your employees, let alone basically any customer-facing activities that you have. Now, increasingly though, the problem that we have as leaders is we see the world changing around us, and we understand that it's changing faster than ever before, and we also understand that the rate of acceleration itself is accelerating. So what do we do about it? Now, a little while ago, basically, I started talking about basically the post-digital world. So consider this. You know, today, you have a digital transformation project, and you've been doing it for 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, however long you've been doing it. Now, as part of that digital transformation project, you might actually have, in fact, likely have, if you're a large organization, have been embedding robotic process automation within the company. Now, as well as other artificial intelligence algorithms and so on and so forth. But up until now, the RPA tools that you've been using and the algorithms that you've been embedding into your company are generally dumb. They are what they are. If this happens, then do this. They're sort of programmed, you know, they are literally done. A standardized kind of workflow gig. However, as artificial intelligence itself becomes smarter and more intelligent, as we move from individual artificial intelligences to AI agents, all of a sudden, what you're now starting to do is you're starting to embed intelligent agents within your business. And these intelligent agents, basically on the one hand, can bring information in, they can analyze that information, but as we see with large action models, those AIs are increasingly empowered and trusted to do something. So whether that's make a decision, whether that is to reroute a driver, whether that is to turn a particular sensor on a power plant on or off, or whatever it happens to be. So at what point are you as business leaders stopping doing digital transformation and starting to do intelligence transformation? Because increasingly, intelligence transformation is the new digital transformation. But we go further. Now, as the pace of change accelerates, these increasingly intelligent artificial intelligences that are actually within your business, if you remember, one of the tricks that OpenAI's ChatGPT does very well is it writes code. Your entire organization is pretty much being run by code today, whether it is your RPA, whether it's your processes, whether it's your software that you're actually using, etc., etc., etc. So consider this. As those artificial intelligences become better able to understand how the world outside of your business is changing, so new markets, new regulations, new GRC requirements, etc., etc. At what point do we start seeing these AIs rewriting the code within your business and adapting your business in real time? At what point does an AI see a new market opportunity and start, like Hyperganic in Germany, designing a new product? And then it creates the marketing for that product, which it then publishes autonomously and automatically. And those are two important distinctions to make. We have automated technology, but increasingly our technology is also autonomous. It kind of decides what to do by itself. So when we have a look at the future of organizations, I think that the future of organizations will be increasingly adaptive. And even Microsoft have been talking about the use of generative user interfaces, where each user interface, especially the Windows interface, actually changes according to the individual user's needs. So this is where everybody on the planet can suddenly have a highly tailored, highly personalized operating system. Then you extend that kind of concept to the rest of the organization, and you end up with organizations basically that look positively sci-fi. However, when we actually have a look at technology, this is kind of where we estimate that we're going by 2028. So we estimate that in 2028, the kind of GPT-6 that Sam Altman is developing, roughly an artificial general intelligence, and an artificial general intelligence, to use Sam Altman's terms and words, they being OpenAI, define AGI as the point in time where artificial intelligence outperforms all humans in all economically valuable work. That is huge. That is the automation, the start of the automation of the entire global services industries. But anyway, getting back to the point here, we believe that those AIs will have an IQ of 1,600 and 1 billion times more general knowledge than any human. And this alone is significant, because if you imagine being an individual with access to this amount of intelligence and knowledge, it becomes much, much easier for me to start launching my own company to take you on. What would you do when you have access to an AI or to a machine system with these stats? We aren't even really discussing it at the moment. We're still trying to figure out what ChatGPT and GPT-4 and 4.0 basically are actually doing for us all. Now, having set the stage, and I appreciate basically that was kind of a long intro, but I really hope that that intro really sort of started to push home to you that the world that you think you live in isn't the world that you actually live in. And that change is accelerating, but also change is becoming increasingly science fiction-like. So what do we do as leaders? Now, from a mindset perspective, there's a lot. So firstly, you've got to remember that leadership is a choice. Culture is required. Now, what I mean by leadership is a choice, you don't have to actually be the leader of a company. You can quit, you can do an easier thing, you could take up another position, and so on and so forth. So if you really want to be a leader, you are choosing to be a leader. That's an important distinction. Now, we also have the adaptability quotient, the emotional quotient, the futures quotient, and the intelligence quotient. But if you want to be a really good leader, if you think about some of the good leaders that you've actually had as an individual, the vast majority of people describe leaders based on EQ. Oh, he or she were very nice to me. Basically, they mentored me, they had time for me and everything else. IQ is much more about, can you do the job? Are you competent? Adaptability quotient is obviously all about how quickly can you see change happening, and how quickly can you adapt to it, and how quickly can you put your plans together. And then futures quotient, increasingly, which actually I kind of quite like, when you have a look at a lot of the new reports that come out on, future leadership and the role of the CEO, there are many, many more organizations today saying that CEOs and leaders need to be more futurist. That's it. In other words, you need to be able to get better at seeing or envisioning or thinking about what's coming, whether it's next or whether it's in the next 5-10 years, and then bringing that back home. So are we all becoming futurists? Hopefully. Now, you also need to unlearn, because pretty much everything that you went to business school to learn, if you actually went to business school at all, is pretty much being thrown out the window. We have new economic models, new business models. Basically, technology is literally science fiction-like. And the things that we can actually do with those different technologies and tools just make your mind bend. So increasingly, the rules have changed and you need to unlearn everything that you've actually learned. And then you need to actually, again, have the ability to relearn new things. And that's hopefully basically what we're doing with this presentation. The status quo is gone. You need to be able to embrace change and ambiguity. Let's face it, as humans, we don't like change. As leaders, we kind of hate change because change is scary, it has risks, we don't know what the risks are, we don't know what we don't know. Plus, if you actually are a PLC, for example, if we do then start to make a gamble on something new and we get it wrong, then we get our heads slapped by the investors or we end up being ousted. So you need to embrace change and ambiguity, and that from an ambiguity perspective, I say that you need to be able to embrace it because while we can see a lot of things emerging, there's a lot that we still don't know. So there's just going to be stuff that literally blindsides you and you're going to be dealing with imperfect data. How you think, feel and act also matters. So when we have a look at top performing organizations, as well as top performing athletes and sports personalities, how you think about something affects how you feel emotionally about that thing and affects how you act. So let's do a little exercise. If you think that the future is bad, dire, dystopian, you feel upset, sad, anxious, worried and depressed. And so you act and go and hide in the cupboard and you shy away from the world. But if you think that the world in the future could be better, you feel more positive and then you start acting in a way basically that brings that brighter future to life. So how you think, feel and act, not just about the future and business and the world, but actually also in your personal life, affects very, very many things. You also need to think about achieving versus avoid. So again, the top performing boards basically that I work with, when you ask them what they want to do, basically they say, we want to achieve number one in the marketplace. Now, if you think about what you want to achieve, you are thinking strategically. I'll give you some examples. You want to be number one in the marketplace. You want to achieve that. You are now thinking strategically. How would you achieve that? What are the steps that you need to put in place today in order to be number one in the marketplace? However, if you're thinking about avoid, you want to avoid bankruptcy. You want to avoid people being made redundant. Then that's tactical. So achieve is a strategic mindset. Avoid is tactical. Try it for yourself. As a leader, you also need to find space and be self-aware because we are seeing, as I say, we are seeing more leaders burning out faster than at any point in the past. So when was the last time you actually just took time for yourself and just mulled things over? Now, when we have a look basically at Salesforce, basically the founder of Salesforce a little while ago basically ended up going on holiday and his wife said, right, look, disconnect, and he didn't want to leave the phone at home, obviously, but she actually stuck his phone in the drawer for 2 weeks. And at that point, basically, he then came back and said, you know what, I'm actually going to relinquish basic control basically of Salesforce, and he did. So find space, go on a retreat. I know people actually kind of beat CEOs up about going on a retreat, but if you're running a large organization, if you have responsibility for thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of individuals, you need to be able to think clearly. You need your head to be in the right space. You also need to be open-minded because if you just have a look at the start of this presentation, I've shown you lots and lots of things, basically, that when I've put them in front of boards, people go, that's impossible. But increasingly, we are moving beyond the impossible. So you have to be open-minded to the changes that are coming, the things that we can already do today, and what technology especially lets us do. And you also have to change your perspectives. Because when we talk about changing your perspective, one of my clients basically is a very large global bank. And they describe themselves as an individual organization that provides financial services to consumers and private individuals and to organizations. Are you actually the company you think you are? Or are you actually a tech company? Because increasingly, when you have a look, for example, at Mercedes, Mercedes is now writing more software than designing cars. When you have a look at General Electric is increasingly a tech company. When you have a look at the vast majority of organizations around you, they are increasingly technology companies first. They just kind of haven't realized it. Even with your own company, if you take away your technology, what are you going to do? CEOs, basically a number of years ago, started appreciating that the ICT department wasn't actually a sunk cost. It was actually a cost benefit. Because as you invest more in technology, technology gives you a market advantage, gives you increasingly a market differentiator. We've seen that. Yeah, when you have a look at the Fortune 500, when you have a look at the biggest companies in the world, they are tech companies. It's not a coincidence. But threats as well, there are plenty of threats. As a leader, you can drive yourselves nuts, or as leaders, you can drive yourselves nuts looking at all the different threats. But a threat to you is an opportunity to you. So flip your perspective again. And then when we actually have a look at how you beat big tech, yeah, a lot of boards I know basically will sit around and they will say, they'll start conversations going, what would the big tech companies do? You know, Amazon and Google and Apple and Facebook and all these kinds of other ones, Alibaba, Tencent. Technology and culture and business mindset is increasingly letting you take on the technology giants in a way that you never could have before. Because in China and Latin America, we are seeing the development of many more super apps. Now, when you have a look at super apps, for example, NIO is generally known as a Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer, but they're actually a super app. They sell over 1 million lines of food. They sell connected home products and insurance products and pet products and all kinds of different things. Because if you remember at the start, I said once you become a digital organization, you can move into new markets faster and easier than ever before. So when we actually have a look at how you beat Amazon, for example, where people are like, you know, what would Amazon do? Increasingly, organizations like TikTok, WhatsApp, you know, WeChat, they are their own giant multi-sided super app marketplaces. In fact, we're seeing more e-commerce transactions starting to happen basically in these super app environments than actually on Amazon itself, along with all of the other transactions as well. So there are ways that we can beat big tech at its own game, using its own game. You should be curious. Now, this isn't just about being curious about what's happening in your own industry. This is actually getting out of your industry and seeing what other industries are doing, but also what other industries in other parts of the world are doing as well. When was the last time that you did that? Because even if you have a look at financial services, a financial services organization in London, for example, is very different to a financial services organization in China or India, and so on and so forth. So be curious, but then also ask better questions as leaders. How many times do you start your meetings with this question? How did we do yesterday? Why aren't you starting meetings saying, how are you? Building that EQ quotient I talked about earlier. What's new? You know, what markets can we dominate tomorrow? What new things are happening, basically, that we should know about? What can we explore? And then also, yes, how did we do yesterday? So ask better questions. Use your time wisely. Be more billionaire. And then, basically, you should think more long-term and take risks. Now, when we have a look at long-term, we've known for a very, very long time that shareholders do not like companies really investing for the long term, because if you invest more on long-term product development, for example, for markets that might exist in 7 to 10 years' time, then you're taking money out of their dividend pot. However, just before the pandemic in 2019, Bezos, Demon, Fink, Jobs, Huang, basically, and even Ma, Musk, and all these other guys, basically, they all got together. So we saw 250 Fortune 250 CEOs coming together at the New York Business Roundtable, which is led by Jamie Dimon, and they agreed that they did not want to put the shareholder primacy rule first any longer. So the shareholder primacy rule was a rule that was put in place in the 1990s saying you put shareholders first. Now, if you remember, basically when Jeff Bezos first started Amazon, he famously went to Wall Street. Excuse me, I have hay fever. He famously went to Wall Street and said, I've got a 7-year plan, but do not expect Amazon, the company, to make any profits for the first 7 years because we're going to be building the foundations. However, when we do make profits, we're going to make a lot. So all of these organizations, when we have a look at these system level shifts that I talked about earlier in markets, in consumer behaviors and all these other kinds of things, they require you to plan for the long term. If you are only prioritizing the short term, you know that you are generally going to start failing. You're going to be one of those 45% of those CEOs who say, in 10 years' time, we think our business will be economically unviable. So increasingly, what I'm seeing is organizations putting between 20 to 30% basically of their, should we say, R&D budgets into Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 thinking. And then you need to be more futurist. Now, on the one hand, basically this might now start making a little bit more sense. However, when I say be more futurist, I'm also suggesting that you start thinking weirdly, in quirky and abstract ways. So let's give you some examples. Now, when we have a look at Hyundai, if I went to Hyundai's leadership team, say 5 to 10 years ago, and I said, I think that you should be an energy company, they say, well, first we think you're probably crazy because we're a car company. So how you think about your company, how you vision your company matters. What's your purpose? What are you really? Now, however, consider this. Companies like Hyundai, Toyota, Lightyear One are increasingly putting solar panels on the roofs. So this is where we think in an abstract way. So what we have is, in this case, we have a vehicle that uses solar panels on the roof to generate its own electricity. So this is a mini electricity generation device, a mini power plant. BMW, by using a different combination of technologies, takes any excess energy or electricity that the car has generated and wirelessly transmits it to either local infrastructure or vehicles that are around this particular vehicle. So, wireless charging. So, BMW becomes an energy distributor. And then with companies like Tesla, these electric vehicles basically are packed full of batteries, lithium-ion batteries. When you plug these cars in at home, they form part of a tied grid energy network. So with Tesla went to PCGE in California and said, you know, if you need battery backup for the grid, you know, so when the grid's electricity supply starts coming under strain and you need to boost the amount of electricity available to the grid, you take it from the cars. Except in California, there are, I don't know, 500,000 Teslas, if not more. So Tesla in California is actually registered as a virtual power plant company. So again, this kind of comes to the future is not what you think it is. Be open-minded. The strange stuff does actually happen. These companies can increasingly be energy utilities, which means that they start taking on RWE or British Gas and so on and so forth, basically in the UK. So these are new competitors that you probably never ever saw coming unless, of course, you went out and explored the world. And obviously you need to be more explorer, and hopefully this is obvious. Because when we actually have a look at being more explorer, I can disrupt your global bank basically with a fridge. So Some of my clients include organizations like HSBC, Barclays, and so on and so forth. And even when we actually have a look at the development of financial services in the Middle East, I use this as an example of the power of technology combined with the power of human ingenuity. So this is a smart fridge. Now, this smart fridge can disrupt your bank. So let's go through it. So this smart fridge basically uses artificial intelligence to figure out basically when it needs to be filled up again, when it needs to buy milk, for example. It's also connected to the blockchain. Now, when your smart fridge basically runs out of milk, firstly, it says, you've run out of milk, would you like me to order some more? Now, ordinarily, you order milk for, say, $1. So the fridge, basically using its blockchain network, basically in its smarts, forms an e-consortium, basically with another 1 million fridges in your country that have also run out of milk. So now, basically, the fridge network, wants to order 1 million litres of milk. So they put out bids, and organisations like Tesco's and Carrefour and Walmart reply, and they say, right, we will supply you basically with 1 million litres of milk, but they don't do it for $1. They do it for, say, 80 cents. And so you get your milk and 1 million other people get their milk. But the fridge says this, it says, I saved you 20 cents on your milk, as well as the rest of your groceries. What would you like me to do? Would you like me just to leave that 20 cents in your bank account? Or, using my artificial intelligent robo-wealth advisor, would you actually like to invest that 20 cents in a low, medium or high risk portfolio of something, shares or whatever? So you decide to invest it. Now you're turning that 20 cents into 40 cents. However, when we actually have a look at this is a business model in the United Kingdom, bearing in mind that this is something that Samsung, as well as Haier, which is the biggest white goods manufacturer in the world based out of China, they bought parts of General Electric's business. In the UK alone, basically, we estimate that this fridge in a year could end up with $360 billion in cash in reserve. Let alone its buddies, the washing machines, the dishwashers, the tumble dryers, etc., etc., the toasters. So this is how I can disrupt your global bank using something that sounds stupid, that we have the technology to build today. Then next, always act with urgency. The future is changing faster than you think. And with a lot of organisations, they appreciate that things are changing around them and they are doing their best. But how much urgency are you applying basically to the changes that you're making within your business or the things that you're doing? So for example, when we have a look at, say, banks in the Middle East, one of the things that they've sort of been slightly worried about basically is, what happens if Apple launches savings products, etc., etc. All of a sudden, overnight, you could see 40 to 50% of consumers perhaps moving away to Apple in this particular case. So most organizations wait until it's too late to innovate and develop new strategies. So how many times have you seen an organization where it's had 3/4 of revenue softening and it's had 3/4 of profit declines, and they've looked at the markets, the bosses have looked at the markets and gone, we think that the markets are fundamentally changing and we think our customers are changing and we see this new competitor here. And then once they already feel the disruption biting at the balance sheet, then they start changing, then they start innovating, then they increase the R&D budgets. That is the status quo modus operandi basically for 95% of companies out there. So what if you did wargaming? What if you did red teaming? Again, a little bit like Samsung and Huawei, basically to try to figure out how could you be disrupted, where from, what are your new products that you could create to move into new markets and so on and so forth, but you did that with urgency. And then when we look at the final section, leadership skills, as leaders, you have got to get tech savvy. Increasingly, you are technology companies. Increasingly, technology is your competitive advantage. It's your sword and it's your differentiator. And increasingly, the rate of technological change is accelerating. And then on top of all of that, increasingly it is thanks to technology coupled with human ingenuity and a couple of other things that is the reason why you are seeing you and your markets being disrupted or transformed in new and often unexpected ways. And I think this is where most CEOs sit, basically, when it comes to technology. We're kind of the caveman analogy, because as a caveman, we are actually looking at this shiny thing that we hold in our hands, and we're thinking, this new piece of technology, what is it? Do I bash this against a rock, or do I take over the known universe with this thing? The technology that you have at your fingertips, the technology that you have at your disposal is increasingly science fiction-like. And yes, it is stressing people out, it is causing anxiety, and many of the people I speak to around the world increasingly just say, we don't know what this tech is actually capable of. And by the time we get our heads around what these technologies can do, like for example Anthropic's Claude, Google Gemini, ChatGPT and the other large language models, by the time we got our heads around what these technologies can do, they've already moved on. Hence, speed and exploration are absolutely crucial. You also, as a leader, need to figure out how to get shit done. This is kind of the entrepreneur's dilemma. You know, I've started many companies myself, and it's difficult. But you just need to learn how to get shit done. It's a skill. It's an art form. You also need to be able to simplify problems. Simplify them down to their simplest components. Because today's problems are so huge and so gigantic, it's almost a case of, I was with DP World basically the other day, and we were having a look at the future of supply chains and things. You know, when you have a look at supply chains, you go, well, you know, we've got high interest rates, we've got inflation, we've got wars, we've got supply chain snarl-ups, we've got hiring problems, we've got regulation problems, we've got geopolitical problems, we've got new competitors, you know, et cetera, et cetera. We've got tech issues and so on and so forth. You have to be able to simplify your problems. Because if you can't simplify your problem, if you don't really know what the real problem is that you're trying to solve in the first place, you're not going to solve it, or it's going to take a lot longer for you to solve. And actually on this particular point, it's actually quite interesting. Organizations that have diversity baked into them, they actually solve problems about 30% faster than organizations that are a little bit more monolithic. People who wear blue suits. Also, this is a weird one. You know, we're always told basically that, you know, change is the only constant. Now, as a futurist, I'm trying to look 50 years out. Now, one of the biggest problems that I actually have is trying to figure out how can we see 50 years out. Now, the fact of the matter is, change is not the only constant. And this is sort of one of the ways basically that I do what I do. Basically, I look for what I call anchoring constants. So I'll give you some examples. Now, if you have a look at an economic anchoring constant, from a government perspective, we generally understand that whether it is today or whether it's 100 years' time, governments basically will want to grow their economies. Then the question is how? Is it humans? Is it AIs? Is it a combination of lots of different things? We also, when we have a look at things like the economy, and there are lots of different constants, but these are just examples. You know, efficiency, economic efficiency basically is a constant. You know, the global economy is always trying to be more and more efficient, and investors are trying to find the inefficiencies basically in the machines. From a company perspective, companies basically want to generally, today or in 100 years' time, maximize profits. And again, we kind of come to how. You know, today we have lots of humans in a company. Tomorrow it might be an artificial intelligence that's figuring out this problem in an autonomous company. Companies also want to acquire resources, cash, capital, goods, all that kind of stuff. From a political perspective, basically again, we want GDP growth. National security is an imperative. You know, so actually when we have a look at anchoring constants that that remain true irrespective of what happens, but they also remain true across all time. This is sort of one of the fundamental ways that I try to make sense of the complexity and the noise, basically, that we are continuously being hit with. And then a lesson from Nelson Mandela. Listen first, respond last. Now, Nelson Mandela basically was famous basically for this particular trick. And what he would actually do basically is, you're in a boardroom, you say to people, I'm thinking about moving into some new markets. If you say what markets you're thinking about moving into, how many times when you go around the room and say, what do you guys think? How many times do people go, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, the idea that you just told us that you had, that's a great idea, do that. Now, what Nelson Mandela basically would find basically is that by listening first, he would say, well, and he wouldn't say this, but he'd say, well, what new market opportunities do you think there are that we could explore? And as you go around the table, you hear what each individual person actually thinks. And their views could actually be different to your point of view or your opinions and beliefs. So then when it gets around to you as a leader, you've actually heard everyone's authentic feelings and opinions. So respond last. You've also got to accept that as leaders, and investors have got to accept this as well, and society as a whole has got to accept this, you are not going to get everything right. But as a leader, you also have to realize that not getting everything right all the time is fine. Because the world is changing at such speed, with such ferocity, that increasingly getting things right is a Herculean task. So be mentally resilient. And then respond and don't react. Now, I actually got this basically from a child psychologist. So he's also a sports performance coach and everything else. And actually, it's quite right. As a human, as an individual, you always have the ability to respond. But we quite often react. So react is the subconscious. So say, for example, which I wouldn't do this, but say, for example, I came and I punched you in the face, right? Your instant thought would be to react. You punch me back in the face, right? But, and we tell children all this all the time. We say, when something happens to you, pause, count to 5, count to 10. Then think what your reply or your response would be. As business leaders, you have always got the ability to respond, whether it's in a press interview situation, whether it's in a meeting, whatever it happens to be. You can respond, but don't react. React is your knee-jerk reaction. That's what will more than often get you into trouble. And then finally, last slide, now do this. I encourage you all to go out, expand your thinking. Go and have a look at the world around you. Be open-minded. Go and explore not just your own industry, but other industries, other cultures, other continents, other languages, other points of view, random points of view. Go and explore as much as you can. Go and talk to people. That's a great way, basically, just to actually sort of hear new stories and get new narratives. And then experiment. Once you've expanded your thinking, once you've explored, once you've found the new things that you think are interesting, bring them back to base and experiment. And experimentation doesn't actually have to cost the earth. You can simply get a whiteboard, for example, and jot your ideas down. It's free. I'm fairly sure that as business leaders, you probably have access to a room. So experimentation can be really, really quite cheap. And then you prototype things, and then eventually those new things might become your new status quo. And that's it from me. So if you enjoyed this presentation, if you did actually make it to the end, because I know my presentations are always very long, I try to pack in a lot so you have a lot of different diverse views and perspectives, then connect to me. So this will go to my LinkedIn and my bio link. So this particular QR code will take you to all of the books, the podcasts, the YouTube channels, and all of my different social networks. So I hope you enjoyed this. And remember, the power is in your hands. The future is in your hands. And you can do all of these things that I've discussed right now, today, to change and shape your future. So thank you for listening, and have a great time and a great future. Goodbye.